My father secretly gave me $150,000 as a safety net. I quickly used all the money to buy gold bars. My mother-in-law instigated my husband to give his sister his debit card to buy herself a car. When he went to swipe the card and saw the balance, he was petrified. That night, I sat alone in our 16th floor apartment in New York City. The sound of traffic on the street below reached me like the echo of distant waves. The apartment was brightly lit, but my heart was dark. On the coffee table lay a thin, cold debit card. I stared at it for so long that I felt it was no longer a card, but a thin knife blade placed right between my husband and me, severing the false peace of my years as a daughter-in-law. My name is Emily, my husband is Michael, my mother-in-law is Carol, my sister-in-law is Ashley, and my daughter is Anna. She turns 5 this year. The little girl was asleep in her room, hugging a stuffed rabbit with worn-out ears, occasionally turning and smacking her lips as if dreaming of eating ice cream. Sometimes I wonder if, were it not for her, I would still be trying so hard, enduring, to maintain what we call a family. But then, looking at her small body, I remind myself that in life, one must always have an escape route, and that escape route sometimes lies not in affection, but in something much rawer: money. My father's name is Frank. He lives in a small town in Pennsylvania. He has been a construction worker his whole life, more accustomed to concrete and dust than to sweet words. My mother passed away over a year ago. Since she left, my father is like an old beam in the house that remains standing, supporting everything, but silently rotting from within. He calls less. He smiles less. Every time we talk, he only asks the same things. Are you okay? Is Anna behaving? How is Michael's work going? Last week, he came to New York to visit me. He arrived at dusk in a light drizzle. He stood at the door with a damp patch on his jacket and his hair speckled with raindrops. I opened the door, called him Dad, and felt a lump in my throat, suddenly feeling like a little girl again. My father came in and looked around the spacious apartment, the shiny furniture. He didn't say if he liked it or not. He just sat on the sofa, rubbing his calloused hands together as if seeking warmth. I served him a hot tea and placed it in front of him, saying softly, "Drink this, Dad, to warm up." He picked up the mug but didn't drink. He held it with both hands, his gaze lost in the liquid. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, "Your mother is gone, and I can't stop thinking about it. You got married and moved far away. You have no family here, and I'm afraid you'll feel lonely." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Dad. Michael loves me. He's just a busy man with his business. You know how it is." My father looked up. His gaze was gentle but so deep it seemed to see right through the "I'm fine" I had just uttered. He sighed and silently opened the worn canvas bag he was carrying. He took out a bank book wrapped in several layers of plastic, along with a bulky envelope. He pushed it gently towards me, as if afraid of hurting me. "Take it, to Dever." Before I could react, he opened the book. The number I saw made my blood run cold: $150,000. I'm not one to be dazzled by money, but I understood perfectly that to earn that $150,000, my father had traded years of sweat, days of scorching sun on a scaffold, and cold nights huddled in a motel on a job site. I jumped to my feet. "Dad, this is too much. I can't accept it. Keep it for your retirement." My father grumbled, raising his voice a little as if I had hurt his pride. "What retirement? I still have my strength. Don't argue with me." I was paralyzed. My father rarely spoke in that tone, and when he did, it was because he was scared. Scared that I would suffer, scared that I wouldn't have a backup. He took a debit card out of the envelope, placed it on the bank book, and said slowly, "I just got this card. The pin is your birthday. Keep it, and don't let your in-laws know." I was startled. "Dad, why would you say that?" He looked me straight in the eye. His voice grew deeper. "It's not that I don't trust anyone, honey, but it's one thing for people to love you and another thing entirely when they see you have money and want to borrow it. And a loan like that is hard to get back. I'm an old man. I've seen a lot. Your mother, before she passed, she took my hand and warned me. The money, let Emily keep it. A woman has to have a backup plan." Hearing my name in my mother's words, my eyes filled with tears. I clutched the bank book to my chest, smelling the old plastic and the dust from my father's journey. I wanted to tell him I was fine, but my throat was tight. I knew there are sorrows of a daughter-in-law that you can't always talk about. If you talk about them, you seem like a complainer. If you don't, they turn into resentment. My father stayed a while longer and then said he was going to his motel to rest, that he had an early flight the next day. I walked him to the door. He turned to warn me one last time. "Remember, don't tell anyone. That money is yours." I watched his silhouette until it disappeared behind the elevator doors. When they closed, I stood there motionless, as if someone had nailed me to the floor. I went back inside. I looked at the pristine living room, the wedding photo hanging on the wall. In it, Michael held me with a radiant smile, his eyes full of promises. Back then, I believed that our love was enough. But real life isn't just about the husband and wife. There's also the mother-in-law, the sister-in-law, and those mouths that always speak of morality, but whose hands are always ready to reach into others' pockets. Ever since I gave birth to Anna, my mother-in-law, Carol, changed completely. She never outright said anything about me not giving her a grandson, but the way she looked at me was enough for me to understand. Whenever a relative asked, she would smile and say, "Well, a girl is fine too. The important thing is that she's healthy." She said it like that, but her gaze was like a dagger. My sister-in-law, Ashley, was the type of girl used to being spoiled. In her 20s, she changed jobs like she changed clothes. She would work for a few days and then complain that it was exhausting, that the boss was difficult, that her colleagues weren't stylish, but when it came to shopping, she never complained about the prices. Ashley had a habit. When she needed something, she called her brother directly. Michael was always in the middle. He loved his mother, he loved his sister, and he always said a phrase that I had heard so many times it hurt me. Just give in a little for the sake of peace at home. But that peace never came from his mother or sister giving in, only I did. That night, lying next to Michael, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing, and I suddenly thought, if one day his family finds out I have $150,000, what will happen? They wouldn't say, "Lend it to Mom." They would say it's family money. They would use our marriage to treat me like their personal ATM. I remembered what my mother used to say. If you have money, don't leave it sitting around like bait. Where there's bait, there will always be flies. I didn't want the money my parents had worked so hard to save to become bait. That night, I opened my phone and checked the financial news. The price of gold was fluctuating. I'm no investment expert, but I understood something very old and very real. Gold that you can hold in your hand is hard for someone to take from you. The next morning, I called an acquaintance at a trusted jeweler. I told him bluntly, "Help me convert all of it into certified gold bars and keep it quiet." 3 days later, the gold bars rested in my hands, so heavy that my heart felt heavy too. Not out of greed, but from feeling the weight of responsibility. I stored them all in a safe deposit box. I kept the key in a small purse that was always with me. I thought that would bring back the calm, but like one of those jokes life often plays, right after I did it, the phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. Carol's voice was quick and firm, as if giving an order. "Emily, are you free tomorrow? We're going with Michael and Ashley to look at a car." I was stunned. "What car, Mom?" "A car for Ashley. What's she going to do?" She laughed loudly. "The girl just met someone. The other family has money, so we have to help her make a good impression." 1. It did surprise. She likes a car that costs almost $100,000. Michael can afford it. I was on the balcony, and a gust of wind chilled my back. $100,000. To me, that was a figure that could destabilize a family. I tried to keep my tone gentle. "Mom, almost $100,000 is not a small amount. Lately, Michael's work, I think things are a bit tight. What if we reconsider?" Carol interrupted me, her voice sharp as a knife. "Tight? He's a director. People respect him. Don't you start controlling the money. In this house, the money is Michael's. If Michael wants to give his sister something, he gives it. You're just his wife. Worry about being a wife and a mother." The words, "you're just his wife," stung. I bit my lip until it hurt. I didn't argue with her further. I just said, "When Michael gets home tonight, I'll talk to him." That night, Michael came home late. His shirt smelled of alcohol. His eyes were red with exhaustion. He collapsed onto the sofa. I gave him a glass of water. He drank it in one gulp and sighed. "Mom called," I said. "She says you're going to buy Ashley the car tomorrow." Michael sat up abruptly. "What car?" "One that costs almost $100,000. Michael's eyes widened, and he ran his hands through his hair. $100,000? Right now, it's hard to move money around at the company. Where am I going to get that much? Just as I was about to feel a sense of relief, his phone vibrated. The screen said, "Mom." Michael looked at me and went out to the balcony to answer. I didn't hear the whole conversation. I just saw his back, initially straight, gradually hunching over. "Yes, Mom. I'll talk to her, Mom." Yes. It was a posture I knew all too well. The posture of a man bound by the word duty. Michael came back inside, avoiding my gaze. He said in a low voice, as if pleading, "Emily, please understand. Mom says if we don't buy it, Ashley will lose face, and the engagement will fall through. She says to see it as an investment, that in a few months, when Ashley is stable, she'll pay it back." I looked at him, feeling an emptiness inside. I asked in a very low voice, "Do you think they'll pay it back?" Michael fell silent. Then, as if remembering something, he looked at me intently. "By the way, the other day when your father came, did he leave you anything?" Hearing that question, I felt as if someone was squeezing my heart. So he already knew, or suspected, and was just waiting for the right moment. I asked, "You knew, Michael?" He hesitated. "I just assumed. I just want to take care of the family." I nodded with a calmness that surprised even myself. "All right, if you want to use that money to take care of your sister, I have one condition." Michael's face lit up. "What condition?" I said, each word clearly, as if hammering nails into the floor. "That money was left to me by my parents as my safety net. If you use it, you have to sign an IOU with the amount, the repayment date, and your signature. You are borrowing it from me. It is not family money." Michael's face turned red and he frowned. "We're husband and wife, and you're making me sign a paper? Are you that calculating?" I looked him straight in the eye. "And your mother? What does she call me?" "Just the wife. When she needs money, it's family money. When she talks, I'm an outsider. I don't want to live like this anymore." We stared at each other for a long time, neither of us giving in. In the end, Michael picked up the pen and wrote with a trembling hand, I don't know if from anger or shame. When he finished, he held out his hand. "Give me the card. I'll go pay tomorrow." I took out the card my father had given me and placed it in his hand. I said in a low voice, as if it were normal, "The pin is my birthday." Michael took the card and sighed in relief, as if he had just won a battle. He thought that by the next morning, everything would be settled. He thought I had given in, but he didn't know that the money on that card was no longer on the card, and that I was no longer the woman who only knew how to yield to keep the peace at home. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The New York sky hadn't fully brightened yet. The yellowish light from the street lamps seeped through the balcony. Michael slept beside me, restless, turning from time to time. I looked at my husband's face as he slept, clearly seeing the tired wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. This man wasn't a bad person. He was just too used to living in the circle of my mother, my sister, my family. So used to it that he no longer knew where the boundaries of his own wife were. I went to the kitchen to make breakfast, just like every day. The pot of oatmeal for Anna was bubbling, the smell of fresh grain filling the air. I did everything slowly, as if a faster movement might cause my emotions to overflow. In my head, the image of the debit card in the pocket of Michael's jacket appeared again and again. I wasn't worried about the money. I was worried about the moment he would swipe the card. Michael got up just as I finished setting the bowls on the table. He looked at me with a somewhat ashamed expression but tried to act normal. "I'm taking Mom and Ashley to see the car for a bit. I'll be back for lunch." I nodded in a monotone voice. "Okay. Remember to eat well." Michael was a bit surprised. Perhaps he expected me to say something more, but I didn't. I bent down to blow on my daughter's oatmeal. Anna, while eating, asked innocently, "Mommy, where is Daddy going today?" Is he going to buy something for Aunt Ashley? Aunt Ashley is getting something new again, Mommy. The little girl smiled carefree. I said yes in a low voice and turned away. There are things children don't need to understand so soon. Around 10 inches the morning, my phone vibrated. It was my mother-in-law Carol's number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Emily, what are you doing? Her voice sounded cheerful. I'm at home taking care of Anna. Oh, good. We're at the dealership with Michael and Ashley. Ashley loves this car. It's beautiful and suits her age so well. The other family liked it too. Don't worry. I gripped the phone tightly and asked softly, And the price, Mom? She laughed. Almost $100,000. It's nothing. A girl has to drive a nice car. That way her future husband's family will respect her. I remained silent. In my head, yesterday's phrase, "You're just his wife," resonated clearly. Carol didn't wait for my response and continued. In a little while, Michael will swipe the card. Once that's done, it's all settled. I'm calling so you don't worry, I said. Okay, and hung up. My hands were trembling slightly, but my heart, strangely, felt no panic or fear. It was like someone who already knows the end of a play and is just waiting for the climax. Around 11, I received a text from Michael. Doing the paperwork. Don't worry. I read it and left the phone on the table. I picked up my daughter in my arms and looked out from the balcony. The sun was bright. Below, the traffic was still heavy. Life went on, not slowing down for a family on the verge of breaking apart. At the dealership, Michael handled the paperwork directly. Carol sat to one side with an expression of pride she couldn't hide. Ashley walked around the new car, stroking the steering wheel with a radiant smile. Michael, just swipe the card already. I'm so excited, Ashley said in a spoiled tone. Michael took out his wallet and the card Emily had given him the night before. He handed it to the salesman, trying to stay calm. In his head, he just thought, as soon as I pay, the problem is over. Mom will be happy, my sister will be happy, and my wife probably won't say anything more. The salesman entered the amount and passed the terminal to Michael for the PIN. Michael typed in Emily's birthday. 1 second, 2 seconds. The screen displayed a message in red. Insufficient funds. Michael froze. He thought he had misread it. The salesman said politely, Sir, could you please check again? Michael re-entered the PIN. The same message. Ashley frowned. What's wrong, bro? Carol leaned in. Is something wrong? Michael didn't answer immediately. His forehead was starting to sweat. The salesman looked at him and said in a low voice, Sir, the current account balance is not sufficient to complete this transaction. Carol's face changed instantly. What do you mean not sufficient? Try it again. With trembling hands, Michael took out his phone and opened the banking app. The figure that appeared before his eyes left him stunned. Balance? $12. Michael felt as if he had been slapped. He stood there motionless, a ringing in his ears. Ashley snatched the phone from him, looked at the screen, and screamed. Why is there only this much left? Where's the rest of the money? Carol slammed the table. Michael, what is the meaning of this? Michael stammered. I don't know. Yesterday it was still. He didn't dare continue. In his mind, the image of Emily from the night before appeared with crystal clarity, his wife's serene gaze, her soft voice saying, The PIN is my birthday. Carol yelled, Don't tell me your wife hid the money? Where did she take it? Ashley cried. But what did my sister-in-law do? I already told everyone. This is so embarrassing. Michael couldn't say anything. He asked the salesman for a few minutes and took his mother and sister outside. It must have been Emily. She must have taken the money out, Michael said, his voice trailing off. Carol gritted her teeth. I knew it. A woman with money only brings trouble. She has no respect for me or your sister. Ashley was sobbing loudly. And what do I tell people now? Michael, standing between the two of them, his head was a mess. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. Not fear of his mother or his sister, but fear of going home and facing his wife. At noon, Michael arrived home, opened the door, and saw me sitting on the floor playing with a puzzle with Anna. The scene was so peaceful that he felt like a stranger in another world. I looked up, saw him, and asked with complete naturalness, You're back. Michael didn't answer right away. He put his keys on the table and said in a hoarse voice, "Emily, where's the money?" I didn't get up. I finished placing the last piece of my daughter's puzzle and only then said, "I exchanged it for gold." Michael was stunned. "What did you say?" "I used all the money my father gave me to buy gold bars, with their certificates and everything." I looked at him steadily. "I told you. It's my safety net money." Michael was trembling with rage. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" I asked him in a very calm voice. "And did you tell me anything before giving the card to your mother?" Michael was speechless. I got up, took Anna to her room, tucked her into bed, and came back out. I didn't want the little girl to hear this conversation. "Michael," I said slowly, "I'm not forbidding you from taking care of your mother or your sister, but you can't use my parents' money, the safety net money for your daughter and me, just so others can look good." Michael lowered his head, his voice softening. "Mom is very angry. Ashley won't stop crying. By doing this, you've created a huge mess in my family." I smiled bitterly. "Is your family in a mess because I didn't give them the money, or because they're used to seeing my money as something that belongs to them by right?" Michael fell silent. For the first time, he didn't argue. Outside, the sun continued to shine. Life didn't stop for a sum of money. But from that moment on, I knew that the boundaries in this marriage had been drawn clearly, indelibly. That afternoon, an unusual silence settled over my home. Michael sat in the living room, his back against the sofa, his face in his hands. I, in the kitchen washing dishes, could hear each of his heavy sighs. I had never seen him so exhausted. It wasn't the fatigue from work, but that of a man who for the first time realized he could no longer control things as easily as before. His phone kept ringing. I didn't need to look to know who was calling. A while later, he got up and went to the balcony to talk. Even though he wasn't on speaker, I clearly heard my mother-in-law's voice. "Come home right now. How can you just sit there calmly after what your wife has done?" Michael replied in a low voice. "Mom, calm down. Let me talk to Emily." "Calm down? No way. She has no respect for me or your sister. That money is family money. You're her husband. You can't control her." I turned back and continued washing. Those words no longer hurt me, perhaps because my heart had hardened. Michael hung up, came inside, and looked at me for a long time. Finally, he said, "Mom wants me to go over. Are you coming with me?" I placed the last plate in the drying rack, wiped my hands, and said calmly, "You go first." "I'm not going now." Michael frowned. "Are you scared?" I shook my head. "No, I just don't want to hear words I already know are coming." Michael stood still and sighed. He put on his jacket, and before leaving, he turned to look at me. "I'll talk to Mom, but you should prepare yourself too." I watched his figure disappear behind the door and felt an emptiness inside. I wasn't afraid of facing my mother-in-law. I was just sad that at this point, Michael still thought the problem was that I had overreacted, not that his family had been accustomed to ignoring my boundaries for far too long. That night, I called my father, Frank. I didn't tell him the details, just said briefly, "Dad, I've exchanged the money for gold." On the other end of the line, my father was silent for a few seconds, then said, "You did the right thing, honey. Just 5 words," and tears welled up in my eyes. I said in a choked voice, "Dad, I'm scared things are going to get difficult from now on." My father laughed softly. "It's better to live with difficulty than to always live in fear. Remember that money is yours. Anyone who truly loves you won't force you to give it up." After hanging up, I sat in the dark for a long time. I understood that from today on, my life as a daughter-in-law would no longer be as peaceful as before, but in reality, that peace was just a facade. At my mother-in-law's house, the atmosphere was tense from the moment Michael walked in. Carol was sitting in the middle of the living room with a stony face. Ashley, beside her, had red, swollen eyes. "Sit down," Carol said, not hiding her anger. "I want you to clear this up today." Michael sat on the sofa opposite her, his head down. "Tell me, Mom, the money your in-laws gave you, your wife is keeping it, yes or no?" "Yes, that's right." "And why does she dare to take it all out without a word to this family?" Michael hesitated. "Mom, that money belongs to Emily. Her parents gave it to her." Ashley chimed in. Even if they gave it to her, it's also your money. You're the husband. You have a right. No. Michael turned to his sister. Ashley, lower your voice. Carol slammed the table. And you're defending her. You treat your sister and me like strangers. I raised you your whole life. And now that I ask for a little help, your wife does this. Michael clenched his fists. For the first time, he felt clearly torn between two sides. On one side, his mother and sister. On the other, his wife and daughter. And he understood that he couldn't stay in the middle forever. Mom, Michael said slowly, I'm not defending anyone, but you have to understand that money was left by her parents as her safety net. I already signed an IOU to her. Carol's eyes widened. An IOU? You dared to sign an IOU to your wife? Ashley cried. I see, my sister-in-law has manipulated him. What kind of marriage is that? Michael jumped up, raising his voice more than usual. It's precisely because we're husband and wife that we have to be clear. Emily has put up with too much for all this time. The room fell silent. Carol looked at her son as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She stood up, her voice trembling with rage. What do you mean by that? Michael took a deep breath. I mean that you and Ashley have gotten used to depending on me for too long. It's my duty to take care of the family, but I can't put all that responsibility on my wife's shoulders. Ashley burst into tears. You've changed. Ever since you married her, you've completely changed. Carol hugged her daughter and turned to Michael. Look how you've made your sister suffer. Michael stood there with a heavy heart, but this time he didn't back down. He said in a low voice, Mom, is Ashley suffering because she doesn't have a car, or because she's too used to being spoiled? That question was the last straw. Carol pointed to the door. Get out of here, and don't come back until your wife comes to her senses. Michael stood for a few more seconds, then turned and left. It was the first time he had left his mother's house in the middle of an argument like that. When Michael came home that night, I was still awake, sitting on the bed, folding Anna's clothes. He stood in the bedroom doorway and said in a hoarse voice, I had a fight with Mom. I stopped folding and looked up. I figured. Michael sat next to me, his arms limp. Mom says if I don't hand over the money, she'll consider that she doesn't have a daughter-in-law. I was silent for a moment, then said, And what do you think? Michael looked up. His eyes reflected exhaustion and confusion. I don't want to lose my mother, but I don't want you and the girl to live in fear either. Hearing that, my heart softened a little. At least he was starting to understand. Michael, I said in a low voice, I'm not forbidding you from taking care of your mother and sister, but I need you to stand on the side of what's right. I need you to see me as your wife, not as a common wallet. Michael nodded, his voice choked. I'm sorry. I always thought you were strong, that you could handle it. I looked at him, exhausted. No one can be strong forever, Michael. In the living room, Anna's quiet breathing could be heard through the baby monitor. I knew there were many storms ahead, but at least that night, I was no longer alone. After that night, my house entered a long period of silence, not the peaceful kind, but a quietness as thick as the air before a storm. Michael still went to work, came home on time, and had dinner with us, but an invisible and palpable thread had been stretched between us. It wasn't anger, but we both knew the story wasn't over. It was just on pause. For 3 straight days, my mother-in-law didn't call, and Ashley sent no messages. I knew this wasn't acceptance but preparation. Someone like Carol was more formidable the quieter she was. On the 4th day, as expected, the storm broke again. That afternoon, while picking Anna up from school, I received a call from an unknown number. A man's voice, deep and a little hoarse, came through. Hello, is this Emily? I paused for a second. Yes, this is she. Who's calling? I'm Tony, your mother-in-law's brother. I gripped the phone tightly. Uncle Tony, Carol's brother. The man the whole family respected at gatherings. He had a business up north, and his word carried a lot of weight in the family. Hello, Uncle. Nice to hear from you. You too, he said slowly. I'm not calling to scold you, just to talk sense. Could you stop by your mother-in-law's house tonight for a little while? I'll be there too. I looked at Anna, who was running happily toward the school gate, and my heart felt heavy. I knew this call was inevitable. Yes, of course, I'll be there. That night, I left Anna at home with Michael. He looked at me worriedly. "You don't have to go. I'll talk to them." I shook my head. "No, this is my business. I'm the daughter-in-law. I have to face it." Michael sighed and didn't insist further. At my mother-in-law's house, the lights were on. When I walked in, Carol was sitting upright on the sofa with a serious face. Ashley, beside her, still had swollen eyes. Uncle Tony sat opposite them, a burly man with a piercing but not hostile gaze. I nodded my head. "Good evening, Mom." "Good evening, Uncle." Carol didn't respond. Uncle Tony nodded. "Sit down, dear." I sat with my back straight and my hands in my lap, telling myself, I didn't come here to apologize. I came to set things straight. Uncle Tony was the first to speak about the money. "Your mother-in-law told me something. I'm not taking anyone's side. I just want to ask a question. Did your parents give that money to you alone? Is that correct?" I replied in a clear voice. "Yes, that's correct. My parents gave it to me as a safety net for me, not for my husband's family." Carol let out a bitter laugh. "A safety net. Once you're married, what safety net do you need? The wife's money is also the husband's." I turned to her, this time not avoiding her gaze. "With all due respect, Mom, if the wife's money is the husband's, why is it that when you needed money, you didn't say it was family money, but that it was Michael's money?" The room fell into a dead silence. Ashley tried to speak, but Uncle Tony raised a hand to stop her. He looked at me and continued asking, "So, why did you exchange the money for gold?" I took a deep breath. "To protect my parents' assets. I don't want my daughter and I to be left with nothing if something happens in the future." Uncle Tony nodded and turned to Carol. "You heard her, sis." Carol, annoyed, retorted, "What do you know? What she did is a sign of disrespect to this family. Her sister-in-law is about to get married. She needs a decent car, and she doesn't care." Uncle Tony interrupted her with a grave but firm voice. "Does Ashley need a car, or does she need to keep up appearances?" Ashley blushed and lowered her head. Uncle Tony continued slowly, "Sister, I'm telling you the truth. That money is not yours, not Michael's, and certainly not Ashley's. Emily did the right thing by securing it." Carol's eyes widened. "You're defending her too?" Uncle Tony sighed. "I'm not defending anyone. I'm defending what's right. You love your daughter and want to help her. I understand that, but you can't force your daughter-in-law to take out her parents' money for you to do it." I felt a lump in my throat. For the first time, someone in my husband's family said something fair. Carol fell silent. Her silence was not one of defeat, but of feeling hurt. I saw it, but feeling hurt can't be an excuse for doing the wrong thing. Uncle Tony turned to me. "If there were a clear document, would you be willing to lend money to Ashley?" I thought for a few seconds and replied, "Yes. If it were a real loan, with a repayment date and accountability, I wouldn't refuse, but not a gift." Ashley looked up with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, but Uncle Tony shook his head. "Ashley, listen carefully. If you borrow, you have to pay it back. If you can't, don't ask." Ashley pressed her lips together and said nothing. The conversation ended in a tense but clear atmosphere. When I got up to leave, Carol didn't stop me or walk me out, but before I left, she said in a low voice, "You really are a stubborn one." I turned around and nodded my head. "Yes, but I'm not wrong." On the way home, I breathed a sigh of relief as if I had just come out of a battle. When I arrived, Michael was waiting for me. He looked at me, his eyes full of questions. I told him everything. Michael listened silently for a long time and then said, "I didn't expect Uncle Tony to say that." I smiled faintly. "Not everyone in your family is unreasonable." That night, lying next to Michael, listening to his breathing, and my daughters in the next room, I knew that the relationship with my mother-in-law would never be the same again. But at least the boundaries had been clearly established, without ambiguity. And I understood one thing: being a daughter-in-law doesn't mean losing yourself. Submission is not always synonymous with filial respect. After that conversation, my mother-in-law and I stopped calling each other as we used to. It wasn't a breakup, but a step back on both our parts. I still sent her messages to ask about her health on weekends and sent gifts on special occasions. But between us, that forced cordiality of the past no longer existed. In its place was a clear distance, enough so that neither of us invaded the other's life. Ashley's situation was different. She stopped calling Michael to complain and didn't send me any messages either. Michael told me she had postponed buying the car and also the wedding. Apparently, the groom's family had started to show caution. Without a luxury car, without the ostentatious appearance Ashley used to flaunt, the relationship cooled on its own. I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't sad either. I just felt that everything was falling back into its proper place. One night, when Anna was already asleep, Michael sat next to me on the sofa. He was holding a glass of water he hadn't touched. I knew what he was thinking. "Emily," he said in a measured voice, "I want to talk to you seriously." I nodded. "Tell me." Michael turned to look at me with a tired but sincere expression. "I've thought about it a lot. Until now, I've always been in the middle, believing that if everyone just gave a little, everything would be fine. But it turns out, the one who always gave the most was you." I didn't respond immediately. I waited for him to continue. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking, "for not protecting you sooner. And I'm sorry for forcing you to defend on your own what I should have been defending with you." I looked at him, feeling a pang of bitterness. This apology was late, but it wasn't useless. "I don't need you to apologize," I said in a low voice. "I just need you to understand. To understand that I'm not against your family. I'm just protecting my own, our small family." Michael nodded. "I understand, and I want to start over." "Start over how?" I asked. Michael took a deep breath. "From now on, any issue involving money and our families, I will discuss with you first. No more deciding on my own. No more forcing you to give in for the sake of family peace." I looked at him for a long time. In that moment, I once again saw the man I had trusted when I married him. He wasn't perfect, but he knew how to recognize his mistakes and correct them. "I trust you," I told him. "But remember that this trust is not unlimited." Michael nodded firmly. A week later, I received a call from my father, Frank. His voice sounded much happier. "Honey, just hearing your voice puts my mind at ease." I smiled. "How do you know, Dad?" "A father just knows by listening," he said. "You're not trembling when you speak anymore." I felt a lump in my throat. "Dad, I didn't want to worry you." My father chuckled tenderly. "I'm always worried, but I'm glad you know how to take care of yourself. A woman, when she gets married, doesn't have to lose everything." I told him briefly about the situation. He didn't ask much, just warned me. "Remember, the gold is yours. No one has the right to force you to hand it over." After hanging up, I felt much lighter. One afternoon late in the month, my mother-in-law called unexpectedly. I looked at the screen, hesitated for a few seconds, and answered. "Emily," she said. Her voice was no longer as harsh as before. "This weekend, I'm making a meal. Bring Anna and come with Michael." I was a little surprised. She hesitated for a moment and added, "It's not to ask for money or anything." "It's just been a while since I've eaten with my granddaughter," I said. "Okay." Although my heart wasn't entirely at ease, I didn't want to refuse either. Avoiding problems forever is not the solution. That weekend, we went. The meal was nothing special, just a few homemade dishes. Ashley was there too. She seemed thinner and spoke less. She greeted me in a low voice. "Hi, Emily." I nodded. "Hi, Ashley." The meal passed mostly in silence. No one mentioned the money or the car. When we finished, my mother-in-law picked up Anna, stroked her hair, and said, "She looks like her father, but she has her mother's eyes." I, beside her, said nothing. As we were getting ready to leave, Carol called me into her room. The room was the same as always, but the atmosphere was different. "Emily," she said, lowering her voice, "I'm not going to apologize, but I'll tell you the truth. I'm not used to a daughter-in-law as firm as you. I understand." "Mom," I replied. She sighed. "But your Uncle Tony is right. That money isn't from this house, and I shouldn't have pressured you." That was the biggest concession I knew she was capable of making. I bowed my head. "Thank you, Mom." She turned away and added in a low voice, "Keep it safe and take care of my granddaughter." I left the room feeling both light and heavy. Some relationships will never be as close as they once were, but as long as we don't hurt each other, that's enough. On the way home, Michael squeezed my hand. I knew he was thanking me, but I didn't need to hear it. I looked out the window, watching the streetlights stretch out, and felt a strange calm. I hadn't won against anyone in this story. I had only won myself, my daughter, and the legacy my parents had left me with a lifetime of work, and I understood that was the most important thing. After that meal, my family's life entered a new phase. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but enough to feel like I was walking on a new boundary. The boundary between remaining the submissive daughter-in-law of before or becoming a woman who protects herself without losing the necessary kindness. Michael kept his promise. He no longer answered his mother's or Ashley's calls by making decisions on my behalf. Whenever something came up, he would say, "I have to talk it over with Emily first." Just that sentence alone was like a thin but firm shield for me. Ashley started calling me from time to time. At first, they were just short messages asking about Anna or how I was doing. I replied reservedly, neither cold nor as close as before. I understood that some distances, once created, should not be filled in a hurry. One afternoon, while picking Anna up from preschool, Ashley called me. Her voice was different, neither euphoric nor haughty. "Emily, do you have a moment to talk?" I watched my daughter playing on the swings and replied, "Yes, tell me." Ashley was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I'm sorry." I paused. Not because of the apology itself, but because I didn't expect Ashley to utter it. "You don't have to apologize," I said slowly. "It's in the past, right?" "No," she insisted. And although I couldn't see her, I felt her shaking her head. "I have to say it. I used to think the family's money was something I was entitled to. I thought Michael had a responsibility to me and Mom, but now I understand that you were the one carrying the most." I breathed softly, not knowing what to reply. "The thing with the fiancé didn't work out," she continued. "They asked if I had a car yet, if I had my own place. When I said no, their attitude changed. That's when I woke up. I wasn't sarcastic or comforting. I just said, 'Everyone has their own lessons to learn, Ashley.'" Her voice broke. "I know. I just wanted to tell you so you'd know I don't blame you anymore." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. The call ended in silence. I knew that Ashley was maturing in the most painful way. A few weeks later, Michael gave me some news I had been expecting. His company was having cash flow problems. A large contract was delayed in payment, while expenses kept piling up. That night, Michael stayed up late doing calculations. I made him some ginger tea and put it on his desk. "Are you going to tell me something?" I asked. Michael looked up, his eyes tired. "I'm thinking. Just tell me directly," I said. "I'm not someone who stays on the sidelines anymore." Michael was silent for a long time and then said, "I don't want to touch your gold." I looked at him, clearly seeing the internal struggle in his heart. I knew that for Michael, asking me this was harder than asking a bank for money. It was a matter of pride. "I haven't said I won't help you," I replied. "But you have to tell me clearly how much you need, what it's for, and what the plan is to repay it." Michael exhaled. "I need about $25,000 to get through the next 3 months. If the client pays on time, I'll pay you back in full." I nodded. "I'm lending it to you, not giving it to you." Michael looked up at me, his eyes red. We drafted a clear promissory note with every clause detailed, not because I didn't trust Michael, but because I didn't want any more ambiguities. Ambiguity was what had made me suffer for years. I sold a portion of the gold, just the amount needed. When Michael had the money in his hands, they were trembling. "I promise this will be the only time," he said. "I don't need promises," I replied. "I need you to deliver." 3 months passed faster than I thought. Michael's company stabilized. The client paid even earlier than expected. The day Michael returned the money, he placed it on the table and bowed his head. "Thank you, Emily," he said. "Not for the money, but for giving me a chance to get back on my feet." I looked at him. My heart no longer stirred. I took the money, put it away, and said, "Let's act as if this never happened." Michael nodded, his eyes teary. One morning in late fall, my father, Frank, came to visit. He brought fruit from his garden. His frame was thin, but his gaze was still warm. He looked at me for a long time and then said, "You've changed a lot, honey." I smiled. "How have I changed?" "You're more steadfast," Dad said. "You no longer have that look of worry and fear." I took his hand, feeling a lump in my throat. He looked around the house and asked in a low voice, "Do you regret keeping the money for yourself?" I shook my head. No. Thanks to that, I've discovered who truly loves me and who just knows how to lean on others. My father nodded with a tender smile. Then I can rest easy. That night, after my father was asleep, I sat alone on the balcony. The wind blew gently. I thought about the journey I had taken, about the times I had blamed myself for being selfish, about the fear of being labeled a difficult daughter-in-law. Now I understood that kindness does not mean unconditional sacrifice. Love does not mean giving until you are empty. I hadn't broken this family. I had only restored order to it. Winter arrived late that year. New York only got a little cold in the early morning, just enough to put on a light jacket before diving into the traffic. I took Anna to school. The little girl held my hand and asked, "Mommy, are we visiting Grandma this weekend?" I paused for a moment and then nodded. "Yes, we'll go this weekend." The girl smiled and ran to her classroom. Watching her little back recede, I felt a rare serenity. I used to avoid questions like that, not anymore. That weekend, we went to my mother-in-law's house. Michael called ahead to let her know the time. Carol answered. Her voice was no longer harsh. She just mumbled an "okay" and told us to come early for lunch. I knew that for her, that was already a concession. The house was, as always, neat and strict. Ashley had arrived early to help her mother in the kitchen. Seeing me, she stood up to greet me. "Hi, Emily." I returned the greeting. "Hi, Ashley." That simple greeting no longer sounded forced. The meal was calm. Anna chattered about school, and Carol listened, nodding from time to time. I watched the scene and felt like a piece of the family was fitting back together, not perfectly, but real. After lunch, Carol called Michael into her room. I stayed outside clearing the dishes with Ashley. While washing, she told me in a low voice, "Emily, Mom's back has been hurting a lot. I've told her to see a doctor, but she keeps putting it off." I stopped washing. "Have you told Michael?" Ashley shook her head. "I don't want to worry him." I thought about it and said, "It's his duty to worry. If Mom is in pain, she needs to see a doctor." Ashley looked at me with gratitude. Perhaps it was the first time she didn't see me as an obstacle, but as someone who also stood on the side of what was right. A while later, Carol called me into her room. I entered, feeling calm. She was sitting on the bed, rubbing her knees. "Sit down," she said in a low voice. I sat in the chair opposite her. She was silent for a moment and then said, "Your Uncle Tony called me the other day." I wasn't surprised. "He talked a lot," she continued. "He said I'm too old to have this temper. He said loving my daughter is fine, but loving her by forcing others to carry the burden is wrong." I lowered my head. "Yes," she sighed. "I'm not good with nice words, but I don't want my grandchildren to stay away because of money matters." I looked up. "I don't want that either, Mom." She looked at me for a long time and then said slowly, "Your money, you keep it. I won't meddle anymore." That sentence to a stranger might seem normal, but to me, it was a milestone. I bowed my head deeply. "Thank you, Mom." Leaving the room, I saw Michael outside with a look of relief. He didn't ask anything, just squeezed my hand tightly. I understood that a new trust was being forged between us. The following days, Ashley got a stable job at a small company. The salary wasn't high, but it was steady. She started taking the bus and managing her own expenses. One night, she called me, "Emily, I get my first paycheck at the end of the month. I want to invite you and Michael to dinner." I smiled. "You don't have to be so formal." "It's not formality," she insisted. "It's gratitude." I accepted. I knew that gratitude was not just for me, but also for the lessons she had learned. Michael's work also stabilized. He no longer stayed late or was irritable for no reason. Some nights he would sit and play puzzles with Anna, a very small but significant thing. One morning, I received a message from my father, Frank. "I'm coming to visit at the end of the month." I smiled. I knew my father had always followed my every change, even if he didn't say it. The day he arrived, I picked him up at the station. He got off the train with his small bag in hand. His body was still thin, but his step was firm. When we got home, he sat down to play with his granddaughter, smiling tenderly. Michael made him a tea and said naturally, "Here you go, Dad." My father looked at Michael and nodded. I knew that in that look there was a silent acknowledgement. That night, after Anna was asleep, my father asked me, "How are things with your in-laws?" I told him everything, without adding or subtracting anything. He listened silently for a long time and then said, "You've done well, but remember not to become callous from always being on guard." I nodded. "I'll remember, Dad." He placed his hand on mine. "A woman keeps her money not to win, but to protect herself. I'm glad you've understood that." A small setback occurred early the next year. Carol had to be hospitalized for a spine problem. Michael took her to the hospital. The doctor recommended a long-term treatment. Ashley called him in distress. That night, Michael came home and sat next to me. "Emily, Mom needs treatment. I'll handle the hospital bills, but I'll probably be short on money." I looked at him without hesitation. "How much do you need?" He told me the figure. I nodded. "I'll lend it to you." Michael took my hand and squeezed it tightly. I knew we would do things like last time, with clear documents, no tears or reproaches, just mutual respect. When she found out, Carol took my hand on the hospital bed with a weak voice. "Thank you, honey." "Don't worry, Mom, just get well," I replied softly. At that moment, I felt that the boundaries I had set hadn't taken anything from anyone. On the contrary, they had helped put things in order. I understood that life would bring more challenges, but after all this, I had learned to stand firm without needing to hurt anyone. I was no longer afraid of being called the difficult daughter-in-law or being accused of being calculating, because I knew that setting boundaries is the only way to maintain love in the long run. After her hospital stay, my mother-in-law was visibly weakened. She no longer had that rigid posture or that authoritative voice that made the whole house obey. Carol walked slowly, her back slightly hunched, and every time she moved, she winced in pain. I started visiting her more regularly. Not out of obligation, but because I understood that when a woman gets older, what she fears most is not illness, but being left behind. Ashley took some days off to help care for her mother. She was no longer as clumsy as before, nor did she complain. Every time I arrived, Ashley would say, "Oh, Emily, you're here." End quote. "Senchen meider liest down." End quote. Her voice was neither distant nor fawning, just friendly enough. I would nod, roll up my sleeves, and go into the kitchen to make some oatmeal for my mother-in-law. Carol would watch me without saying anything, but her gaze was different. One afternoon, while Ashley was out buying medicine, we were left alone in the room. My mother-in-law was lying on her side, looking out the window. Her voice was weak but clear. "Are you angry with me, dear?" I placed the bowl of oatmeal on the nightstand and pulled a chair up to her bed. "I'm not angry." She turned to look at me with a deep, tired gaze. "I pressured you too much before." I remained silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew that at that moment she needed to vent more. "I've spent my whole life depending on my son," she continued, "used to thinking that what was his was also mine. When you married him, I didn't know how to adapt. I still thought the daughter-in-law should follow the customs of the husband's house." "I understand, Mom," I replied in a low voice. She sighed, a very long sigh. "Now lying here, I realize that you young people are the ones taking care of me the most. And the money, now that I think about it, seems so trivial." I looked at her with a heavy heart. There are lessons that are only learned at the cost of one's health. That afternoon, Michael brought my father to visit my mother-in-law. My father stood before the hospital bed and greeted her respectfully. "Good afternoon." Carol nodded with a somewhat uncomfortable expression. Perhaps in her mind, the image of this humble but firm father-in-law had always made her feel a certain reservation. My father didn't talk about money or bring up the past. He just asked about her health, recommended she eat well, and sat down to play with his granddaughter, Anna. My father's serenity lightened the atmosphere in the room. Before he left, he told me in a low voice, "You're doing the right thing, honey, but don't let your heart harden." I nodded. I understood what he meant. Setting boundaries doesn't mean closing your heart. A few months later, my mother-in-law was discharged. She returned home. To a more paced life, Michael and Ashley took turns caring for her. I no longer had to handle everything alone, nor was I forced to assume responsibility as if it were my natural obligation. Ashley started saving money and gave a small amount to her mother each month. She told me, "I don't want to be a burden to you all in the future." I listened and smiled. There were sentences I would have never imagined hearing from Ashley. One night, Michael told me, "I want to renovate Mom's room to make it easier for her to move around. I can handle it myself. I don't need your money." I looked at him and nodded. "If you're sure, that sounds fine." Michael smiled, a rare smile of relief. I knew he was learning to be a true pillar without depending on his wife's silent sacrifice. Life seemed calm, but another blow came, silent but profound. My father fell ill. It wasn't anything serious, but it was enough to scare me. The doctor said he needed long-term cardiac monitoring. I dropped everything and went back to my hometown to care for him for a few days. Michael arranged his work and came with me. Seeing my husband preparing hot water and cooking for my father gave me a very different feeling. It was no longer resignation, but partnership. One night, my father called me over. His voice was weak. "Honey, I've thought about it. That gold, keep it safe. Don't sell it for me." I took his hand, my eyes teary. "Don't worry about that, Dad. I can handle it." He shook his head. "No, I'm old now. What I leave you is for you, not for you to carry more burdens." I understood, and I promised him I wouldn't touch that part unless it was absolutely necessary. When I returned to New York, I felt I had matured a little more. Not because I had been through a crisis, but because I had learned to set boundaries on love. One day, Ashley called me with a cheerful voice. "Emily, I got a raise." I smiled. "Congratulations," she continued, a little hesitant. "I've saved a little. I want to buy Mom a new bed." I listened and felt comforted. I didn't give my opinion or interfere. I knew it was something Ashley needed to do for herself to grow. One night, while we were all having dinner together, my mother-in-law looked at me and said slowly, "Emily, if something happens to me in the future, I don't want to bother you all. I'll manage on my own." "Don't say that, Mom," I replied. "A daughter-in-law will always be a daughter." She looked at me, her eyes red. For the first time, I saw in her gaze not distrust, but acceptance. That night, sitting on the balcony, overlooking the city lights, I thought about the journey, from being a submissive daughter-in-law, always afraid of offending others, to being a woman who knows how to say no at the right time without losing kindness. I was no longer afraid of displeasing anyone because I understood that true relationships are not broken by setting boundaries. On the contrary, it is the boundaries that help them endure. The rainy season came early that year. The sudden downpours in New York made the city seem to slow down. Standing on the balcony, watching the rain fall, I felt a deep calm. My family's life, after so many shocks, had also found a new rhythm. There were no more violent upheavals, but small waves that served as reminders not to let my guard down. My mother-in-law was recovering slowly but steadily. She had gotten used to moving carefully and eating in moderation. Whenever I went to visit her, she no longer spoke to me in an authoritarian tone, but would usually say, "Sit down and rest a bit." A simple phrase, but I knew it was a sincere change. Ashley was also different. She went to work regularly. At night, she helped her mother in the kitchen and no longer went out with her friends late. One day, she called me to her house to talk privately. "Emily," she began with a somewhat tense voice, "I want to ask you something." I looked at her and felt it. "Tell me." She wrung her hands and got straight to the point. "I'm seeing someone. He's not rich or flashy, but he's a good person." I smiled. "That's very nice." Ashley exhaled in relief. "I was afraid you'd think I was being a gold digger again." I shook my head. "I don't think that. You've changed." She lowered her head. Her voice softened. "The car thing. I gave you a hard time. I won't forget it." I didn't remind her of the past, just said, "What matters is how you live now." Ashley nodded. I saw in her eyes a maturity that was no longer just in words. At the end of that month, my father called again. His voice was slower, but clear. "Honey, I've thought about it. I want to sell the land behind the house." I was startled. "Why sell it, Dad?" He chuckled softly. "You can guess why. I want to leave you a little something more in case you need it in the future." "Dad, don't sell it," I pleaded. "I don't need more." His voice became grave. "It's not for now. It's there. If my daughter has one more escape route, I'll be more at ease. I fell silent. I understood my father, and I understood that for a father like him, worrying about his daughter was never enough. That night, I told Michael about it. He was thoughtful for a long time and then said, "If Dad has already decided, we shouldn't oppose it. But I think in the future, if our parents need anything, we should be the ones to take care of them." I looked at Michael, feeling a warmth inside me. He no longer saw my family's help as a given, but as a reciprocal relationship. Another setback occurred just when everything seemed calm. Michael's company had an IRS audit. It wasn't a serious irregularity, but it was enough to stress him out. Those days, Michael barely slept. I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but he said nothing about money. One night, he sat next to me with a hoarse voice. "I can handle this on my own. Don't worry." I took his hand. "I'm not worried about the money. I'm worried about you." Michael fell silent. A while later, he said, "If the worst happens, I'll take it on myself. I don't want you to worry anymore." I understood it wasn't pride, but responsibility. I didn't pressure him. I just stayed by his side, making him a hot dinner, reminding him to sleep. Sometimes support isn't in money, but in not adding more pressure. Finally, it all passed. Michael's company didn't get a major fine, they just had to adjust their accounting. The day he received the notice, he came home early and hugged me and our daughter. "It's over," he said in a low voice. I smiled. I knew that every time we overcame a challenge like this, our family grew a little stronger. One afternoon, my mother-in-law called me. I thought she needed help with something, but when I arrived, she just asked me to sit down and handed me a small wooden box. "This," she said in a measured voice. "I've kept it for a long time. I'm giving it to you." I opened it. Inside was a pair of antique gold bracelets of a simple design. "I can't accept these, Mom," I said. She shook her head. "I'm not giving them to you as money. I'm giving them to you as the senior daughter-in-law for you to keep." I froze. For Carol, this was a great acknowledgement. I bowed my head. "Thank you, Mom." She looked at me, her gaze softened. "I'm old now. I just hope you all live in peace." I took the box, feeling a slight tremor in my hands, not for the value of the gold, but for the meaning of the gesture. That night, I placed the bracelets in the safe deposit box next to my gold bars. I didn't feel greedy. I just felt I was taking care of what had been entrusted to me. Sitting in the living room watching Michael play with our daughter, I suddenly thought that if I hadn't maintained my boundaries that day, if I had given in out of fear of criticism, perhaps today everything would be different and not necessarily better. I realized that happiness doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from living according to your own values and daring to take responsibility for your choices. Outside, the rain had stopped and the city was lit up. I took a deep breath, feeling light. The road ahead was still long, but I was no longer afraid. I had enough clarity to move forward. After my mother-in-law gave me the gold bracelets, I had a very strange feeling. It wasn't joy or pride. It was the feeling of someone who has just passed through a narrow door, knowing that there is no turning back to the old way of life. From then on, I would no longer be just the obedient or difficult daughter-in-law in someone's eyes, but a recognized part of this family with all its boundaries and responsibilities. I didn't wear the bracelets. I kept them in the safe deposit box with my gold. To me, they were not jewelry, but a milestone of the change for which we had all paid a price. The following days passed calmly. Michael worked regularly. At night, he had dinner with his wife and daughter. Anna was growing up fast and starting to ask many questions. One day she asked me, "Mommy, when I grow up and have money, who do I give it to?" I laughed. "Who are you going to give it to?" "Whoever you want. But remember to keep a little for yourself." The little girl nodded seriously, as if it were a very important lesson. That weekend, Michael suggested the whole family go visit my father. I looked at him, a little surprised. Before, whenever we went to my hometown, Michael went out of obligation, not on his own initiative. "I want to go see Dad," he said. "It's been a long time." I nodded. Inside, I knew this was another silent but evident change. When we arrived in the town, my father came out to greet us at the door. He had truly aged. His back was more stooped, his hair much whiter, but his eyes, upon seeing his granddaughter, still sparkled. Michael got out of the car. "Hi, Dad," he greeted very respectfully. My father nodded and patted Michael on the shoulder. "It's good you've come." The meal in the town was simple: a vegetable soup, stewed fish, and a plate of olives. Michael ate with great appetite and even said, "I haven't eaten this well in a long time." My father looked at him, smiling tenderly. I, sitting next to him, felt a warmth inside. Some things don't need to be said to be felt. At night, after Anna was asleep, my father called Michael to sit on the porch for some tea. I, from inside, didn't hear the whole conversation. I just saw the two men sitting opposite each other in silence. A while later, Michael came in and called me. "Emily, come here." My father looked at me and said slowly, "I'll tell you the truth. I used to worry a lot about you, Emily. I worried you'd get married and have no support, but now I see you're standing firm on your own." Michael lowered his head. "Yes, I know I didn't do well before." My father nodded. "Knowing is enough. A man can make mistakes, but the important thing is to correct them. If you've managed to support your wife and family, you've already done more than many." I listened with teary eyes. My father wasn't reproaching me or taking any credit. He was just saying what needed to be said. Back in the city, life went on, but then something happened that made me realize that challenges never end. One afternoon, Ashley called me with a hurried voice. "Emily, are you free? I need to see you." I met her at a coffee shop near my house. Ashley arrived with a pale face and trembling hands. She said immediately, "The person I'm dating told me he wants to get married, but his family has asked about a dowry." I looked at Ashley in silence. "The truth is, I don't have much," she continued, her voice breaking. "They don't say it directly, but I know they're comparing." I asked her, "What do you want from me?" Ashley lowered her head for a long time and then said, "I'm not asking you for money. I just want to ask you what you think I should do." I breathed a sigh of relief. I was glad Ashley hadn't opened her mouth to ask for money like before. "Ashley," I said slowly, "if someone marries you for your money, even if you have a car and a house today, they'll ask for more tomorrow. You've already suffered from that once." Ashley bit her lip. "But I'm scared too." "And yes," I looked her straight in the eye, "are you afraid of losing him, or are you afraid of having to support yourself?" Ashley burst into tears. I didn't comfort her immediately. I let her cry, let her listen to her own heart. A while later she said, "I understand. I'll tell him clearly. If it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out." I nodded. "I support you." A few days later, Ashley sent me a message. We broke up. Just 3 words. I read it and my heart felt heavy, but I knew that was the price of maturity. On the other hand, Michael's work entered a new phase. He was offered a higher position, which meant more pressure. One night, he stayed up doing calculations for a long time and then told me, "I want to buy a small apartment in my name to rent out long term." I looked at him. "Have you thought it through?" "Yes," Michael replied. "I don't want everything to depend on your part in the future." That sentence left me silent for a long time, not because I didn't trust him, but because I realized this man had finally understood that responsibility is not about taking from his wife to care for others, but about taking on his own share. We discussed it in detail, with clarity. I gave him my opinion, but I didn't co-sign or become a co-owner. Michael wasn't offended. He said he understood, that it was fairer that way. At the end of the year, we celebrated Anna's birthday. My mother-in-law came early, Ashley too. Carol, seeing her children and granddaughter gathered, had teary eyes. She told me in a low voice, "The peace in our house now is thanks to you knowing how to keep a cool head." I didn't reply, just smiled slightly. I didn't need praise. I just needed to know I hadn't been wrong. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the living room, looking at the silent house. I thought about the journey, about the moments I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, about the decisions that once scared me. If I could go back to that moment, I would do the same, because I understood that a woman who doesn't keep her own money deprives herself of the right to choose. And there is no choice more dangerous than having to live depending on the kindness of others. Time passes, not loudly, but deeply enough for everything to settle. I realized that after the crises, what had changed the most was not the money or my position in the family, but the way everyone looked at each other. My mother-in-law no longer analyzed my every word. Ashley no longer looked at her brother with expectant eyes. Michael no longer had the air of a man who always had to appease things to keep the peace, and I no longer lived in a constant state of defense. One morning early in the year, I took Anna to school and then stopped by the market. I ran into my mother-in-law at the usual vegetable stall. She saw me and nodded. "Buy what you need quickly and go home to rest. It's cold today." "Yes, Mom," I replied, those everyday phrases I used to long for and dared not expect. When I got home, I received a call from Uncle Tony. His voice was still measured but sounded cheerful. He was in New York for work and wanted to visit. That afternoon he came over, had tea with Michael, asked about his work, about my father's health, without mentioning the past or making indirect remarks. Before he left, he said something I'll never forget. "Honey, by keeping your boundaries, you've kept your home. Many people don't understand that in a lifetime." I walked him to the door, feeling relieved. Some acknowledgments don't need to be ostentatious. They just need the right person to say them at the right time. Soon after, Ashley announced she was planning to move out. Not out of anger with her mother or to prove anything, but because she wanted to be truly independent. She had saved a little and rented a room near her work. My mother-in-law, upon hearing this, was silent at first. At night, she called Ashley into her room. I didn't hear the conversation, but I knew she had cried, not in opposition, but out of concern. For the first time in her life, Carol had to learn to let go of her daughter. The day before she moved, Ashley came over with a bag of fruit. "Emily," she said, "I want to thank you. If it weren't for you, I'd probably still think depending on the family is normal." I smiled. "It's not thanks to me, it's because you wanted to learn." Ashley lowered her head. "I hope that if I ever have my own family, I won't make my daughter-in-law suffer." I listened to her words with a heavy heart. I knew they were not empty promises, but the result of having stumbled. On the other hand, Michael's plan to buy an apartment to rent out began to materialize. He took out a loan on his own, calculated the cash flows. Some nights he would sit at his desk, frowning at spreadsheets. I didn't interfere. I just asked, "Do you need my opinion on anything?" When he said yes, I gave it. When he said he could handle it, I nodded. We had learned to respect each other's space. One day, Michael told me, "I think if all goes well, in a few years we could move to a bigger house for the girl." I looked at him without nodding or shaking my head. "Let's take it one step at a time." Michael smiled. "You're still just as prudent." "Prudence isn't a bad thing," I replied. "It helps us not to pay more prices." Michael fell silent and nodded. My father called to say that someone had asked about the orchard land, offering a good price. I advised him not to rush. He said he wasn't selling it to spend it, but to put it in the bank in my name, for me to use when I needed it. I was speechless. I knew that was my father's way of loving his daughter, silently and steadfastly. I told Michael about it. He was silent for a moment and then said, "I know Dad loves you. I just hope I can do the same for our daughter in the future." I looked at him, seeing his maturity reflected in his face. In the middle of the year, I had a minor car accident. Nothing serious. But I had to be hospitalized for a few days. Michael took days off to care for me. My mother-in-law came to visit me every day with hot soup. She would sit by my bed and murmur, "You're too thin lately." I smiled weakly. "I'm fine, Mom." She took my hand. Her voice trembled. "I used to think you were too tough. Now I realize that toughness is so you don't break." I turned away. Tears welled up in my eyes. Some words come late, but they are enough to heal. Ashley also came to visit me with a thermos of oatmeal she had made. "Rest and get well," she told me. "Michael and I will take care of things at home." I nodded. I felt I was no longer alone in my own family. When I was discharged, I returned home. Life went on. But in me, there was a very clear change. I no longer felt I had to prove anything. I knew where I stood, what I needed, and what I could refuse. One night, Anna sat next to me and asked, "Mommy, are you scared?" I asked her. "Scared of what, honey?" "It's just that I used to see you sad often." I hugged her. "I'm not scared anymore, my love." "Why, Mommy?" "Because I've learned to protect myself." I said in a low voice. "And I want you to do that too when you grow up." The little girl nodded and hugged me tightly. That night, lying next to Michael, listening to his breathing, I thought about the journey. I held no resentment for the past. Without those stumbles, I wouldn't have understood the value of standing firm. My happiness now is not loud. It resides in meals without suspicion, in conversations without calculations, in knowing that I have the right to choose and the courage to take responsibility for my choices. I know the future will still bring challenges, but I'm not afraid. I have learned to navigate the storms without losing myself. After my hospital stay, everything in the family seemed to calm down completely. There were no more insistent calls or questioning looks, and no one mentioned the word money with a tone halfway between demand and reproach. I knew it wasn't because they had forgotten, but because everyone had found their place. My mother-in-law, after taking care of me in the hospital, changed noticeably. She no longer interfered in our life as a couple. If something came up, she would call Michael first, and he would consult me. I no longer felt like an outsider or the one who had to give in to keep the peace. One morning, my mother-in-law called. Her voice was measured. "Emily, are you free this weekend? I wanted to ask you to accompany me to church." I was a little surprised but accepted. That weekend, I took her. In the car, she looked out the window, her voice subdued. "I'm old now. Years ago, I thought that to be at ease, I had to control the household money. Now I realize that if you squeeze too tight, your own hands get tired." I didn't respond. I knew it was a confession, not a justification. In the church, she lit a candle and prayed for a long time. Upon leaving, she said, "I don't expect you to be close or affectionate with me. I just hope you all live in peace so that Anna doesn't grow up watching the adults argue." I bowed my head. "That's the only thing I wish for too, Mom." At that moment, I understood that our mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship would never be like that of a mother and daughter, but it had reached a rare balance without hurting each other, without taking advantage of one another. Since moving out, Ashley came home less often, but every time she did, she asked about her mother. She no longer acted like the little, spoiled daughter, but like an adult who stood on her own 2 feet. Once she invited me to her small, rented apartment, proudly showing me a bookshelf and a neat kitchen. "I didn't know living alone was so hard," she said, laughing and sighing. "Hardship teaches you to value the efforts of others," I replied. She nodded with a distant look. "I used to think it was Michael's and your obligation to take care of me." I didn't blame her. I just said, "The important thing is that you know now." Ashley looked at me for a long time and then said, "Emily, my biggest fear is going back to my old habits." "Having fear is a good thing," I replied slowly. "Fear reminds you not to repeat the same mistakes." Ashley smiled, more relieved. As for my father, his health stabilized. He didn't sell the land. He told me, "I've thought it over. As long as I can, I'll keep it. You're strong enough now. I don't need to worry as much as before." I listened and felt a mix of relief and melancholy. Children grow up, parents grow old. It's an inescapable law. I didn't hear the conversation, but that night Michael told me. My father had told him that he felt at ease leaving me in his care, but he gave him a warning. Never force her to choose between her peace of mind and her dignity. Hearing that, I felt a lump in my throat. I knew it was something my father had wanted to say for a long time. Our family life proceeded at a steady pace, without getting rich overnight, but without struggles. I continued to keep my gold untouched. Michael moved forward with his own plans. Every major expense was discussed clearly, without secrets or defenses. One night, when Anna was already asleep, Michael asked me, "Have you ever thought where we would be if you hadn't secured the money that day?" I looked at him and answered honestly, "I dare not think about it, but I know that if I hadn't, I wouldn't feel this calm today." Michael nodded. "Me neither." He took my hand and added, "I used to think marriages shouldn't have too many boundaries. Now I understand that not having them is what's dangerous." I squeezed his hand without saying anything more. A small incident occurred at the end of the year, but for me, it was very memorable. At a family party at my mother-in-law's house, a distant relative blurted out, "This house's daughter-in-law keeps a tight grip on the money," I thought to myself. Before I could say anything, my mother-in-law spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. "She's keeping the money her parents gave her. What's wrong with that?" The whole table fell silent. The relative smiled forcedly and said no more. I, sitting there, felt moved, not because I was defended, but because I knew Carol had sided with justice, not appearances. That night, back home, I told her. "Thank you, Mom." She waved her hand. "It's nothing. I just told the truth, that's all." But I knew my journey as a daughter-in-law had reached a very different stage from the beginning. On the last night of the year, I sat down to record expenses in my notebook. I suddenly remembered the woman I was a few years ago, always afraid of being judged, of being called calculating, of offending others. I smiled. That woman no longer existed. Now I know what I need and what I don't, when to give and when to keep. I know that kindness is not sacrificing yourself to exhaustion, but keeping enough for yourself so you don't feel resentment. Then I closed the notebook and looked towards the bedroom, where Michael and my daughter slept peacefully. The soft yellow light illuminated their faces. I felt serene. This journey had almost come to an end. Not the end of the story, but the end of a vicious cycle. The vicious cycle of blind submission, of limitless sacrifice. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The end of the year in New York wasn't cold, just a little crisp, enough to calm the spirit. Standing on the balcony, watching the traffic begin to thicken, I suddenly thought about the path I had traveled. It hadn't been long, but it was deep enough to change a person completely. Michael and Anna were still asleep, father and daughter, one large and one small, breathing in unison. I watched the scene for a long time. There used to be mornings when I would wake up with a vague unease, a worry about what might happen that day, about saying the wrong thing, about money, about my mother-in-law, about my sister-in-law. Now that worry had vanished, not because everything was perfect, but because I knew I could face anything with a steadfast mind. I went to the kitchen to make breakfast. As the aroma of oatmeal began to fill the air, Michael woke up. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me, and smiled slightly. "You're up so early." "I've had enough sleep," I replied. Michael came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Me too." Just 2 simple sentences, but I could hear the peace in them. After breakfast, I took Anna to school. She held my hand, telling me as we walked about the weekend at Grandma's house, about how Aunt Ashley had taken her to buy books, about Grandpa's call to see how she was. I listened, feeling a warmth in my heart. The relationships that were once tense had now become a normal part of my daughter's life. That was what I valued most. At noon, I stopped by to visit my mother-in-law. Carol was sitting on the patio cleaning vegetables. Seeing me, she looked up. "You're here. Come in and have something to drink." I sat next to her and helped. We didn't talk much. The silence between 2 women who had had so many conflicts was no longer heavy. It was the silence of those who understand each other enough not to need more words. A while later, Carol spoke. "I've been thinking, if something happens to me in the future, I don't want to be a burden to you all. I've already told Ashley." I looked at her and replied softly, "As long as you take care of your health, that's enough, Mom." She nodded. There were no more lectures or implicit demands. I knew this was her way of maintaining her dignity and also of respecting me. Ashley came out of the house with an expense notebook in her hand. She smiled. "Emily, I just recorded this month's expenses. I realize that having everything clear makes me feel lighter." I looked at Ashley and saw a reflection of myself. "Yes," I said. "When you get used to it, it takes a weight off your shoulders." Ashley nodded. She no longer asked, no longer depended. She was learning to stand on her own 2 feet. It was something no one can teach. You only understand it by living it. That afternoon, Michael picked me up to go home. On the way, he said, "I just signed the rental agreement for the apartment." "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "Slow but sure." I smiled. We no longer made grand promises. We just talked about what we could do and did it. At night, we all had dinner together. Anna was laughing. Michael was talking about work. I reminded Ashley to visit my father on the weekend. Everything was so simple that I suddenly realized that happiness doesn't come from having more, but from no longer having to distrust one another. When my daughter was asleep, I took out my notebook and wrote a few lines, not about money, but about what I had learned in this marriage. I learned that being a daughter-in-law doesn't mean losing the right to protect yourself. I learned that saving money is not selfishness, but saving the right to choose for myself and my daughter. I learned that true love does not demand that the other sacrifice themselves to exhaustion. I remembered the moment Michael swiped the card to buy Ashley the car and saw the empty balance. If I hadn't decided to buy gold that day, if I hadn't maintained my boundaries, perhaps everything would have taken a different course. Not necessarily worse, but I certainly wouldn't have the serenity I have today. Some say that a woman who saves money is cunning, but I understand that a woman who doesn't is reckless, because when everything collapses, only those who are prepared have the calm to get back up. I haven't won against anyone in this story, nor have I lost. I simply chose to stand by my own side, and thanks to that, the people around me were also forced to change, to adapt. Not out of fear, but because they realized that those boundaries were necessary. Night fell. I turned off the light and lay down next to Michael. He turned and whispered, "Thank you, Emily." "Thank you for what?" I asked. "For not giving up," he replied, "and for not losing yourself." I remained silent. In my heart, the answer was very clear. I protected myself not to win, but to have enough love to give. Outside, the city slowly sank into silence. I closed my eyes, feeling the steady breathing of my family. The road ahead would surely have more challenges, but I was no longer afraid. I had learned to navigate the storms without losing the most important things, my dignity and my inner peace.